Okay, hi everyone. Thanks for joining us for another Medix Coffee Chat. Today we'll be discussing one of the biggest shifts happening throughout clinical research as a whole regarding academic medical centers and how they're adapting to changes with research funding, increasing competition for industry-sponsored trials, and then just growing pressure for accelerated study activation. To help unpack what's happening across the market, I'm joined by Dean Lothrop. Dean's the Vice President of Clinical Research at Medix, one of my good friends. I've been working with him for a while, so brings a ton of expertise. We'll discuss what academic medical centers are experiencing, how operations are evolving, and then what research leaders are paying attention to and should be paying attention to moving forward. So to start us out, my name is Ashlei Fong-Kutchins. I am our Senior Director of Scientific Delivery at Medix. I have been working with Medix for about 11 years. Done a little bit of recruiting, moved into sales, and then I've been in leadership since 2019 alongside Dean. So I will let him introduce himself and then we'll jump in from there.
Yeah, thanks, Ash. It's 11 years of working together and our first coffee chat. So
it's first of many.
Yep. Dean Lothrop, I'm our VP of operations for our life sciences division. So I've been with the organization, as Ashley mentioned, for a little over 11 years now. And Medix as a whole, we have three components of our business. We have our healthcare enterprise, we have our life sciences division, and we have our technology division. A majority of the time that I've spent over the course of the 10 years has been majorly focused within our healthcare division and life sciences. And, over the course of the last 8 months, I specifically focused in our clinical research division. And, holistically, we support sites, sponsors, and CROs across the spectrum of clinical operations. So yeah, it's been a fun 8 months with us finally having the chance to be able to work together, and looking forward to digging into that.
Yeah, awesome. Thanks, Dean. Let's start out with some big picture, something that's driving a lot of the conversations today within research. There's a lot of changes within funding, specifically over the last 18 months. Why do you feel like this has become such an important topic within academic medical centers?
Yeah. I mean, it really started back in early 2025. We had an administration change at the beginning of last year. And, I think a lot of individuals know, and this is not just specific to academic medical centers, even though they obviously were heavily impacted, but also on the health system side too. But with NIH funds and grant funding significantly either put on pause or cut, there's been a tremendous amount of uncertainty over the last 18 months. And, for a lot of organizations, you're looking at what can you control versus, what can you not. And with some of the changes with the administration and funding, a lot of entities, including academic medical centers, took a look and said, how can we either diversify or pivot our business to make sure that we are still in position to continue to scale and grow our research operations? One of the main things that we've heard predominantly over the course of the last 8 to 9 months is the focus on bringing industry-sponsored trials to these academic medical centers. Obviously from an academic perspective, they're always going to have a focus on NIH and grant-funded trials. That's a piece of being an academic. But also being able to diversify your portfolio with industry-sponsored trials has been a hot topic for a lot of the systems that we partner with.
Yeah, absolutely. And historically, can you share what some of the different ways health systems have funded their trials?
Yeah, really 3 main ways is historically how these systems have gone about it. One is grant funded, right? So again, a predominant or leader in that space is the NIH. Number 2 is industry-sponsored trials. So when I say industry-sponsored trials, I mean those are trials funded by either pharmaceutical companies, biotech companies, or medical device companies. And then the third main way of these trials being funded is PI-initiated trials. So throughout the course of time, those are the main 3 ways that AMCs and health systems have ran trials throughout the course of their organization. And depending on the entity, their portfolio can certainly range in terms of percentages of how much of their portfolio is industry sponsored versus grant funded versus PI initiated. So depending on the entity, that can certainly vary a little bit too.
Yeah, that makes sense. So for some of these organizations who haven't before, for them to be able to make that pivot and land some of these industry sponsored trials, what do you feel like you're hearing from health systems and academic partners in order for them to be able to make that a reality?
Yeah, it's interesting, right? So a lot of health systems that we partner with, they really look at different parts of their clinical trial process completely independent. For example, traditionally, the cancer center or oncology has gotten treated separately from other therapeutic areas. So take cardiology, neurology, GI, derm, psych, et cetera. Those are still predominant players in the clinical trial space, but not all the time are they working together. So a big piece is understanding the portfolio, not just from an oncology perspective, but also from a non-oncology standpoint. And for us, a lot of what we're hearing today is really on the non-oncology side, where there is a heavy focus on historically grant funded trials. That's a big area of focus for a lot of these institutions to be able to make the pivot and adjust and go land some industry sponsored trials. For a lot of the sponsors that they're partnering with, really their focus is on their ability to have diversity of patient populations, with which health systems certainly have a large pool to be able to potentially pull from. Obviously quality of data, and then also the ability to get their trials up and running in a fast and timely manner too.
Yeah, and when you think about that, obviously there are a handful of variables that can come into play that can cause delays and such in getting some of these up and running. What are some of the other barriers that you're hearing that prevent systems from being able to land these trials?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think this is where it gets really interesting, right? Is like, obviously there's a problem and there's a focus area of where they want to go, but there are certainly hurdles that they have to, a lot of our partners have had to, I would say, come to grips with, or try to figure out how to make adjustments within the organization in order to be able to feel like they could be effective in doing so. And a lot of the feedback that we've gotten over the course of the last 8 to 9 months is really starting with a focus on study startup or time to activate trials. A lot of the institutions that we partner with, we're hearing upwards of, think about it, 200 plus days to be able to get a trial from inception to starting to enroll patients. And from the sponsor perspective, like, they want to be able to get a trial up and running as fast as they possibly can. And if it's taking an institution 200 plus days to be able to get a trial up and running, that is significantly, one, setting them back, but then also, the sponsor might look at them and say, like, that is too long of a lead time. And, we potentially are going to look at other options to be able to get our trial up and running in a quicker manner. So that's one area that institutions have had to address and look to pivot their operations and to be able to do that effectively. Some of the areas that we've heard of is, one, getting away from, maybe not getting away, but making sure that they're focusing on a central IRB, so that their institutional review board can effectively run their process and it doesn't have to go through the local level. And also there's a piece of access to patients. And one of the main topics, not just from a research perspective, but just in healthcare across the board, is these health systems are acquiring other hospitals in rural areas and a lot of times in other states where they haven't had operations before, and ensuring that there's access to clinical trials, not just in the brick and mortar of where that trial is being originated or run today, but also across the spectrum of the organization. And that's a big focus area, is making sure that they're capturing the ability to enroll patients across the system enterprise wide.
Yeah, that makes sense. I know study activation has come up a lot. Study startup, the idea of that, outside of the fact that it's something that sponsors looking at of like, where's my money going? Is it going to be able to get this study started up quickly, or is it going to be too slow from a trial perspective? Why do you feel like that's become such a critical focus area for some of these sponsors?
Yeah, I mean, really, like, the landscape of where trials are being run has significantly changed over the last 5 to 10 years. And, where historically a lot of clinical trials being run at the health system or academic medical center level, now today you have these decentralized site networks that are way more prevalent than they were, 15 years ago. And, their focus is to engage a patient population in rural areas. And also, a lot of the feedback and what we see in the partnerships that we have is they have the ability to get trials up and running in, sometimes as few as a couple of weeks, up to that, 30, 60, under 90-day mark. And, if you're a sponsor and you're looking at the ability to get a trial up and running in potentially 30 to 60 days versus the option of, 200 plus days, that certainly is putting a lot of pressure on academic medical centers to compete, right? And to say like, okay, we need to address our internal operations and our systems to be able to get trials up and running in what we're hearing a lot of is that like 90-day or less mark.
Yeah, absolutely. Appreciate the extra transparency there, because the landscape's so competitive these days, as we know, between the decentralized option and then for academic medical centers to be able to keep up figuring out, okay, what's our solution here? How do you feel like it has changed, and why do you feel like this is an investment area that's worthy of an academic medical center prioritizing?
Yeah, I mean, well, one, from a funding perspective, some of the entities that I've met with, they've had their research budgets cut, from last year, this year, and a lot of them are also forecasting cuts to their budget for FY27 a year from now. And a lot of these organizations are looking for ways to diversify, and it's a big focus area to be able to say like, okay, we can not just be banking on our grant funded trials, but also to be able to get your industry sponsored trials up and running. What's unique though is in the oncology space. So in a lot of the cancer centers that we partner with, historically, a lot of the trials that they have already been running have been on the industry sponsored side. So, for them, this isn't anything new, but really how we were talking about, the oncology versus non-oncology side, the non-oncology side that operates independently or a lot of times separate from the cancer center, this is a new area of focus for them. Not that they weren't running industry sponsored trials, they certainly were, but not at the scale that a lot of them are looking to potentially scale and grow today.
Yeah, absolutely. And obviously, as some of these academic medical centers and other organizations change the infrastructure of how they're doing clinical research, hiring the right individuals is all the more important. Obviously, always important, but certainly tip-top important as they make some sort of an adjustment on their end. What skill sets and roles do you feel are becoming even more important for academic medical centers as they modernize research programs?
Yeah, it's a great question. I would probably take that in a couple of different routes. Number one being it depends on what your goals are, and it depends on where you are in your journey. And one of the health systems that we've had a number of conversations with, they're looking to centralize all of their industry sponsored trials away from their grant funded trials. And they're going to run a completely separate entity and division. For them, it is going to be a start from the ground up in order to be able to scale and grow the operation that they have today. So what they're doing, and this is a health system that operates across numerous states. We're talking about 4 or 5 states across the country, and there's acquisitions of other hospitals that are coming into play. And in a lot of areas, especially in the outpatient or ambulatory setting, they have clinics that, could potentially have patients that could enroll in trials that they're just not effectively utilizing today. So if you're really starting from the ground up, there might be a need for site assessments for individuals to go to specific practices, speak with the PI, look at the location, understand if they have the space and the staff to be able to run a trial, to be able to even understand what they need to do to get a roadmap to get trials up and running at that specific facility. So there could be a site assessment need, for a lot of the organizations that, they are, enterprise-wide or 10 plus hospitals or whatever the case may be, there's also a research analytics play. And, there's a huge focus around technology and AI. Obviously that's something that everybody knows and hears across the board. But a great example that I would use is there might be a health system that has a hospital in Wisconsin, and there might also have a brick and mortar hospital in Georgia. And if they're running a trial in Georgia and there's a patient in Wisconsin that could potentially enroll in that trial, they have to be able to speak to each other to be able to say like, hey, we have someone that could enroll in this. And the reality today is that in a lot of systems, the left arm doesn't speak to the right, and there's gaps in their ability to connect those dots. So there certainly is a research analytics play around patient recruitment and feasibility that we've started to see a huge demand in, along with regulatory. When we talk about centralizing an IRB, there absolutely is a regulatory component to ensure that you have people from a research admin perspective in order to be able to either expand the current team that you have today, or in a lot of the areas that we're hearing, because a lot of the systems that we work with are incredibly decentralized, with this change, they're also looking at this as an opportunity to centralize a lot of their research admin functions. So when you talk about budgets and contracts, grants, regulatory, CTMS, et cetera, like those are all being done in consolidated, centralized operations now. So there certainly is an opportunity across the spectrum as you consolidate to make sure that you have the right people that are aligned with the organizational goals. And number two, if you're potentially doing it at a decentralized level, you also need to make sure that you have the right skill set, that you have individuals that can speak to each other too. So those are some of the main areas I would say from an infrastructure perspective, to make sure that you have the right setup across the entity. And then a lot of what you're also going to need is clinical operations too. So take your CRCs or your CRNs, the individuals who are working directly with the patients to administer that trial. It's always going to be such an important role for a health system, is making sure that you have the right coordinators in place to run the trials effectively too.
Yeah, absolutely. And as you think about, you and I, after 11 years in the saddle doing this together, we could probably popcorn this question, but for everybody to not have to listen to us every other word and see Google flip our pages up individually, I'll just let you own it. But how do you feel like Medix as a whole is best positioned to support any of these health systems, academic medical centers, really any organization that as they make the transition toward this change in the industry?
Yeah, I think one of the unique things about Medix is that we have the capability and ability to support across multiple lines of business. And candidly, like this is what we've done in other service lines of the organization too, right? Like a lot of components of Medix, whether it's our revenue cycle practice, where we've helped to centralize CBOs or stand up call centers, this really is no different from a centralization perspective. So, for us, from a project-based standpoint, that's an area that we have a substantial level of expertise in. And also as an organization, I think one of the great things about having the chance to meet leaders across the country is also hearing their level of humility around understanding that this is something that everyone's trying to figure out and learn. And I don't think that any institution or organization today has a perfect answer for exactly how to do this the right way. And this is a huge push and huge focus for a number of systems that we're partnering with. But you also want the ability to be nimble, to have a partner that can adjust and pivot. If what you thought was the way that you needed to go ends up not being, and you need to make an adjustment. To be able to have a flexible workforce and also have a partner that's specialized in that space and understanding exactly what you need from a skill set perspective is going to be really important, because especially for some of these, really niche roles, take like a research analytics component, there might not be individuals that necessarily have the experience on their resume. Like those are going to be a lot of transferable skills that, people might have developed from other roles, and knowing where you can plug and play those type of backgrounds is really important. And, I always share too, like one of our main ways of sourcing and identifying candidates is always going to be going after passive job seekers. And as you're looking for the best of the best, or, talent that can really innovate and understand what the organization's vision is and make it a reality, you need individuals that are critical thinkers. And you're not always going to necessarily find those people just actively applying on job boards. You have to go and be able to find that expertise, which is exactly what our strategy is to support.
Yeah, for sure. See, we probably could have popcorned that. I was thinking the word for word, the same thing. We probably could have popcorned that, but it's for the best, everybody, that we did that. As you think back on the last however long we've been in our first ever coffee chat, Dean, if any academic medical center leader happens to tune into this and hears your messaging, what do you feel like the one biggest takeaway you hope that they have from this?
Yes. Yeah, it's a great question. I think for me, just knowing and understanding that there's a lot going on right now. I know that we talked about industry sponsored trials and study startup times being a stressor. And, there's even a lot right now with health systems and Epic and coming out with a new CTMS. And is that something that, organizations are going to implement? That there is just a lot of change management and differentiators that organizations are looking at today. My best piece of advice is, I kind of mentioned it before, but everyone's trying to figure it out. And I think one of the most fun parts of this job for me is I've always said not knowing the answer, and being able to talk to different thought leaders and gain and get their perspective, and being humble enough to ask for guidance, and being able to share with institutions that might be going through a similar process as you. And in any way that we can help connect those dots, we obviously try to do that as much as we possibly can. But knowing that everyone's kind of going through that same evolution right now, and I think the more that as a holistic research engine, we can collaborate across the country, it's going to help us to drive trials to patients in a safe and effective manner better, which is why we all do what we do.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, Dean, thanks for taking the time to chat today. And everybody watching, we appreciate you guys joining us for another Medix Coffee Chat. If you would like to continue the conversation or have any questions or thoughts about clinical research staffing, research operations, or even the future of academic medical centers, we would love to connect. Otherwise, we will see you next time for another Medix Coffee Chat.